Okay, hello everybody. This is Dean Val with Timothy and Dean Kevin, who's the star here, who's going to be sharing his experiences on the Great Witness, the New Adventure Series show. And we will be commenting and asking questions of Kevin. Welcome.
This real side experience would begin with me entering what seemed to be a dark and gloomy cave system, accompanied by a group. We would be brandishing flaming torches to afford extra illumination, and as we delved deeper into the cave system, it became apparent that we were not alone. The caves seemed to be the lair of large, bipedal, beast-like creatures, as we would get our first initial glimpses of them. They looked rather like you might imagine trolls to be, large, muscular, and hairy, shambling creatures. They seemed to be very basic in regards to their consciousness, not much removed from animals, really. As we go through the animal body types in creation, the real awareness eventually creates a body type that has the capacity to self-decide, to use free will, whereas up until that point, the animal body types had a direct connection with the real awareness, and hence made sense with life, as they operated from a position then of that which supports the isness, and all the environments throughout creation, because the is all about itself. The real awareness is this isness, so naturally a real awareness connected body type would always do what makes sense with itself, the isness that it is. But at a certain point, we take on a body form where we start self-deciding. We then create illusions of the personal self. Through what we personally decide, we disconnect from the real awareness, and our personal self takes on a life of its own, and generally decides in such a way that is not supporting of life, the natural environment, or the is of the real awareness. Everything is. I can imagine then that the first free will deciding body types, assumed after all the animal ones, might rather be these very basic species, such as these troll-like creatures, for such individuals had only just stepped from the animal kingdom with the corresponding consciousness, and so I would imagine their body forms would reflect this, rather basic in their drives, but free will granted nonetheless, a little like, I suppose, the intelligent monkeys that originally inhabited the earth before reptilian manipulation. Can it be that these were in fact free will, self-deciding body types, but those assumed right after the animal types, and that the initial free will decisions the smart monkeys then made perhaps opened them up to the collective effects of reptilian intervention into their affairs, Then the reptilians, having recreated them, inserted all the various entities into their recreations. But anyway, these troll-like cave dwellers were very aggressive, and would attack anything entering their caves. We were not here to engage or interfere with them, or cause them distress in any way, and indeed we continued our progress while being invisible. I would say, in fact, we had stepped out of the cause and effect, personal side of the real side, and were operating from the true reality aside from the simulation in our real awareness. Hence, everything on the real side, the created simulations of it, we could observe from the real awareness overview, but not get embroiled in it, unless we activated something of the personal self, stepped into the personal self, and then we were in the personal, simulated, real side arena, where we could get mixed up with the other ideas of it, and experience the effects that came from doing so. Really then, we didn't need torches, or to traverse the cave systems for our objective. But the more adventure-like the experience, the more the personal self will remember it on waking. So the situations tend to be over-exaggerated, and made more into the sort of movies that we are inclined to pay attention to. Seems our assignment was to rescue some other individuals, and my impression was that they had been placed here by the dark forces. This was along similar themes of previously recounted real side experiences, whereas individuals start to step up, they draw the attention of the dark forces, who of course want to keep everyone in creation as agreeable slaves to their positions of power. The dark forces watch everyone on the physical and the real side, and will realize when their slaves begin to take the risk to break from the reptilian designed consciousness, and the designed simulation that stems from it, that the reptilians have gotten everyone to agree as to the construction of, and so what they have been doing is seizing all these stepping up, deciding to become more aware individuals, and locking them down as much as they are able, as much as they can do so according to the agreements of the target individuals that allow the dark force infringement. Everything from placing individuals in isolated pocket-dimensional areas in creation, to drawing them into fake dark force UNUversities, and many experiences of late have involved groups and myself, then rescuing these individuals, again where agreement to our assistance will allow. For when individuals are just starting out with their awareness process, often they don't recognize what's going on, they don't realize the deceptions, they don't understand that they are locked down on the real side, and they don't recognize the reptilians that are doing this to them, as of course you have to see through the shape-shifting outer forms the reptilians tend to assume. Much like Marjorie Klemp, who was unable to recognize the reptilians who took her away. And so, in this real side experience, the dark forces had snatched another group of stepping up individuals and had placed them here in this cave system, wherever in creation it was. The dark forces, knowing, of course, the aggressive nature of these troll-like beings, and although then the trolls really had nothing to do with the kidnapping, they served very nicely as prison guards in a sense, as they were very territorial and simply reacted to anyone entering their turf, not realizing these individuals who were on their territory had been placed there by the dark forces. I won't say it was against their will that they had been placed here, as of course agreements through their personal selves must have allowed the kidnapping in the first place, but it seems they also were agreeing to be rescued, which allowed us to feature as the rescuers in the effects of the simulation they had decided on. The trapped individuals were not aware enough that they could recognize how to extricate themselves, and indeed, who knows how the situation looked from their perspective. Their personal self may not even have fully realized their predicament. Like the group of children we attempted to rescue in another real side experience, and we could only liberate 11 of them, as the others were not aware enough to realize they were locked down, and so would not be requesting assistance for a situation they didn't recognize as being restricting and dark force orchestrated. The ones we came to rescue were human in appearance, and huddled together in small groups throughout this cave system. So it was a case that we would traverse the caves and find all the groups, and they would all willingly accompany us as we led them through the cave systems. Seems my group and I had the ability to step into our real awareness and be aside from the simulated personal side, but those we came to rescue did not, and so we rather had to step into the simulation, render ourselves perceivable to them, that we could get their attention, and they could then follow us. Naturally then, we now were in agreement to this decided situation, as we had engaged with the ideas of it, and so now were operating in the simulation rather than just observing it. It was a case then of navigating the caves without drawing the attention of the troll-like beings. There were a number of times where blunders were made, where we took a wrong turn, and would be attacked by the trolls. For in a sense, the effects the kidnapped individuals had decided on, based on their agreements, was a karma that my group and I were taking on by assisting them. And so this translated as the potentiality of my group and I now being attacked, and we would defend ourselves enough that we and those we were rescuing were protected, but in a way to cause as little harm to the trolls as possible, for they were really just innocent, inadvertent extras in this situation, defending their territory, etc. A few of those we were trying to extract were swamped by the trolls, killed or dragged away, and we were seemingly unable to assist them, as though bound by their agreements that had us unable to intercede on their behalf. Whatever the nature of the agreements in their consciousness made it so that we were unable to act without violating their free will. Also, as we proceeded, we kept coming across sparkling gold artifacts strewn throughout the cave systems. These seemed to represent reference ideas that, if secured, would provide a greater awareness of the ease that these ideas referenced. Not that a reference can ever be the recognition of that which it references, but it was as though, as we were here and assisting these trapped individuals, as we agreed to this assignment, and were earning our way accordingly for our own awareness process, these gold artifacts became available to us, as though representing awareness gleaned in response to that which we had decided to earn that awareness by, and the golden nature of the artifacts very much suggested beneficial awareness bolstering ideas that lead to the recognition of the ease, with gold very much the colour representing the true reality. Anyway, we managed to extract as many of the trapped beings as their agreement parameters would allow, and the scene switched. No longer were we in the cave systems, but in an outside setting, and leading this exodus of liberated individuals through what looked to be a kind of desert wasteland. Curiously, although there were no other beings representing opposition or adversity, there did seem to be traps laid across the desert. They were impossible to perceive, for they were placed under the sand, but with our real awareness, we knew exactly where they were, and so it was that we led this rescued group through the desert in a single file, navigating them carefully through this wasteland. Again, we had to engage with the rescued and the simulation they had decided on. Far easier would it have been to just teleport them all to safety, rather than this arduous trek, but we had to work with whatever scenes and situations and in whatever limited ways the group we were rescuing afforded us. We were in their simulated movie and had to play by their rules, and with their awareness being as it was, they didn't recognize how they could make any adjustments they desired that would allow for ease of extraction, but had agreed to the rescue overall, despite its laborious nature. A few of the rescued would occasionally stumble out of line, take a misstep, and trigger one of the desert traps. What happened then was that a collection of razor-tipped chains would burst from the ground, encapsulate the individual, and drag them under the sand. They reminded me a little of the hell chains in that movie Hellraiser, restricting binding chains that dragged people into the earth, representing agreements that limit our positioning in life, of being very creationally based and immersed, as much as being in elevated positions would represent a greater awareness view, so would the opposite indicate a diminished view, and to be pulled under the ground, the most limited awareness view you then could have. And much like those that had been killed or captured by the trolls, evidently agreements had effected the simulation in this manner for those that triggered the traps, and for them we could do nothing. Accompanying us on this trek was a curiously short individual, a kind of dwarf, and I have seen his like before on the real side. For a number of real side experiences I have shared involved these dwarf-like characters assisting us on various assignments. So a group of beings also stepping up and working with the guides and Dwayne, and participating when required or when they decide. The scene switched again, and my impression was the vast majority of those we had come to rescue had been successfully extracted from their predicament. But there were two more individuals, it seemed, I was to assist in addition. I was now in a place that looked a little like the Antarctic, what with everything covered in a layer of snow, with large snow-covered mountains surrounding the position I now was in. As I looked, I would see two large black cats crouched part way up one of the mountains, looking very much like pumas. They seemed to be attempting to hide from a hunter, an individual brandishing a very serious-looking rifle and scanning the mountains in search of these two cats. On previous real side experiences, I have seen this four-legged cat form assumed by a number of aware individuals, as though it is a favoured form for those who are further along in their awareness process, and when it is decided to adopt a form other than their own, the four-legged cat seems to be the preference. And indeed, I've seen Dwayne on a few occasions as a large, golden lion, and my impression was that these two pumas were new friends, and that they were attempting to move into their real awareness position aside from creation and be beyond attack then on the real side, to be beyond this dark force hunter's reach, for I had the impression of the hunter's ill intent. The snow represented rather the purity of the real awareness isness, aside from creation, a position they were attempting to stand in, and as I watched, I could see they only seemed partially successful in concealing themselves in the snow of the mountain they were on, to stand in the protection of the real awareness pure reality, aside from creation and the hunter, as though their position part way up the mountain also represented the extent of their awareness and their ability to stand in their real awareness position. They were possibly unable to step aside from this personal self-arena attack, maybe due to the emotional response they were activating in response to it, possibly fear, etc., that would draw one from the real awareness position and into the personal self, where they now are in a potential attack position. And inevitably, the hunter would notice the two pumas and draw his rifle, attempting then to fire ill-intended ideas at the two new friends, and if he hit the target or not would determine if these ideas had been agreed with. The hunter wasn't prepared, however, to suddenly be smashed to the ground, for I had transformed into a large bear and took it upon myself to intercede on behalf of the two individuals in puma form, and thus they would be safe. The scene switched, and I would enter a bunker that was positioned in this snowy region. Inside would be a number of aware, orientated individuals, discussing their various assignments and adventures, etc., as though this building made for a kind of recreational spot where we would kick back and regale each other with our activities. I would place on a table the very hunter I had pounced. Seems I had brought him to this bunker, and he had rather shrunk in size to maybe 6 inches or so in height. He also looked like a plastic Lego man, curiously, and it was as though no awareness now animated what had become of his body form. Maybe he was some kind of robot, or perhaps, based on his body being now effectively a plastic toy, indicated that this dark force individual wasn't real, wasn't standing real, and completely personal self-immersed, as most of them tend to be, of course. And his size, that of 6 inches, represented his awareness also, as a size has a tendency to do on the real side, Size can also represent the individual's self-perception of their importance. So it really depends on the context of the experience, and we can always read the intent and discern the awareness of those we encounter through the real awareness, beyond the forms any individual assumes. There the experience would end, and I'm uncertain of the identity of the two individuals I assisted, who were in puma form, but it further shows how we do support and look out for each other on the physical and on the real side. Duane, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "This is the adventure, and you get to do this and bring this back, and giving the objective view for people. And little by little we figure out how to focus, etc. So you get all these views, and the individuals, the pumas, are not quite there yet, so they're very vulnerable. Everything is about awareness. There's always predators around, especially now with where we're at on this planet. Everyone's being watched, etc. There's predators everywhere. Pay attention every moment. Learn to pay attention and be now every moment. That's real."
Thank you. You said the is all about itself, and that's like, yeah, that's what it is. But I see that as how the hierarchies, the negative forces use that imagery or the idea of the is and step it down and dilute it into like a god with different attributes. But you see how it kind of gets stepped down, this, say, higher idea, or this like idea of an is. Well, it's all about itself, and it gets stepped down into like the cow, who's all about itself, but in a negative way, you could say, in a way that's not a benefit for everybody. It's a benefit for itself, whereas the is for the benefit of everybody. That you see how things get stepped down all the time, diluted. One idea that could be somewhat truthful can be just diluted and distorted. And that's where we are now. There's a little bit of truth in everything, but it's not really the is or the reality that we're talking about. I was going to ask a couple questions that came up. Was when you took on their karma, like, what does that mean to you? Like, when you took on their karma in this experience, did you have any effects from that, or how does that work for you? These people, these beings that you rescued, you said you took on their karma.
You know, all the decisions and agreements we make always have the effects that follow, and all the effects, we're constantly the effects of ourselves through the consciousness, which is mainly subconscious. And obviously not all effects are necessarily favourable, and people may then be bewildered as to why they get attacked and imprisoned and so on and so forth. But with creation being as it is, nothing can feature in their experience or indeed the particulars of it unless there is agreement that allows that to be so. The individual basically designs their simulation, and they also design the parameters of it, and also the characters that can play in it and in what capacity they can do so. And what the controllers have done is basically got people to agree that they can be included in their simulation, and also generally they've got the individuals to agree to be controlled and to agree to the control of these dark forces characters over them, which basically means they have got the individual to fashion their consciousness in such a way that they now have a simulation in which the dark forces can step into it, play the villains, and then play out controlling type of roles according to basically the parameters of the movie, the simulation, through the design of the consciousness that the dark forces have got the individual to design in a way of their choosing, generally initially based on marketing ploy and such, and as it's moved through the eons and the centuries and the lifetimes, it becomes subconscious. And so these individuals will find, even on their process of awareness, that there are still open door agreements through the personal self, which the dark forces can infringe upon on the physical and the real side. And like I was explaining in the experience, when to be completely the more aware you become, the more capable you become anyway to handle situations through a real awareness that knows what to do. But also, the more aware you become, the more you learn to be able to step completely into your real awareness and aside from creation. So if you've stepped out of the personal self and you're completely in your real awareness, you're operating in a position where no cause and effect can take place. So regardless of the agreements in your personal self, you can simply step out of it and now you're removed from it. But when individuals who are initially starting out or more rudimentary stages of it, I mean, I'm at a rudimentary stage at it as well, to be fair. And like Dwayne says, we're all very young at this, but especially people just starting out, they will have a lot more attacks on the real side, and also attacks that they can't deal with themselves because they haven't recognised enough of their real awareness to be able to be effectively be able to serve as a protection against these situations. And so what happens then is that because their simulation is then expressing the effects of these agreements which are allowing attacks, what individuals can do is they can take on the effects themselves. And it's like taking on the karma of the individual. It's like there must be agreements that allows you to do that. You can't just march into somebody's simulation and assist them. But effectively, I mean, it is actually an expression of power, really, because if you are interfering, in a way, you are interfering or interjecting in somebody else's simulation, and so effectively you are, in a way, you are not violating their free will, but you are imposing power over their simulation and situation. And when you do that, you take on then the effects, and then you are then in a situation where you can also be attacked or have those which you are interjecting, those attacking those individuals you are interjecting on behalf of, can now then impose on your simulation, and you have to deal with them as well. Because like Dwayne says, when he confronts all these individuals, when he deals with all these characters on the real side and such, he takes on their effects, he takes on their karma, and all their karma and consciousness baggage then gets incorporated into his own, that he then has to suffer the adverse experiences that stem from it. Like he'll get pains and back issues and like that intergalactic rash that he had. And so as we take on these effects, they just express in different ways. And so, like Dwayne also said, how when healers heal somebody, they're also taking on their effects, because if someone has got some pain or some illness or something, these are the effects they have decided and agreed to themselves. And so these effects they must face. When an individual heals them, they're coming in, and again it's a power position where they're actually taking those effects on themselves, and then they'll become ill as a consequence. And so I don't know if that answers your question or not. I've been on a bit of a ramble then.
Did you have an effect from this experience in some way?
Well, yes, because now because I was initially in my real awareness overview position aside from creation, but because I engaged with the effects that these individuals had created for themselves, I then, to engage with them, I agree with them, which then means I move from the real awareness side onto the personal side arena of the which is the simulation on the real side. And now effectively I can have these troll-like beings potentially attack me, which indeed happened, because I agreed with the idea, the effects of these individuals and their predicament. I then featured in the effects, but also took on the same effects that they were experiencing through how their consciousness was, in that they were in a position where they could be attacked. And so I and my group now were in a position to be attacked also, and so we had to deal with that and take that on. But we did that in such a way as to, as I said, to not harm these troll-like beings, because as I said, they were more innocent individuals, really just reacting and responding to situations, because they didn't know where these individuals came from. They just found them in their territory. And so that's why I said that's why the dark forces planted them there, because they were almost acted like guards in a way, you know, to keep them there. And so that's the effects we took on, and we had to then deal with these trolls.
And then one more question. You turned into a bear, an experience. Was that like conscious, or did you just from somewhere in the back, or was that a conscious decision? Or just turn into a bear and from your real awareness, somewhere from your real awareness it happened because it was appropriate?
No, I made no personal self decision to do so. It was just a case that my personal self made the decision to intercede on behalf of these individuals, and then my real awareness provided me the means by which I could do so, because it made sense for me to do so and to protect these individuals, because they were other awareness folks that were basically, you know, under duress by this hunter, because they were in their rudimentary stages and were very vulnerable. And so the real awareness, so I made the personal self-decision. It made sense, so it was backed, I suppose you could say, by the real awareness, which then provided me the means by which I could do that, which made sense with life, which turned me into a form which allowed me to take the hunter down, and so I turned into this grizzly bear.
And Tim, do you have anything, a comment or question?
Well, it's interesting, the experiences. I think of all the millions of lifetimes, all the awareness is experiencing, and how after all the experiences, even like the Queen of Orion, to be put into a phantom zone where they can't do anything anymore, but change or start over or something. It's interesting how with all those experiences.
Yeah, that's why Dwayne says, you know, help people make better decisions, better choices, because you can always make a choice, no matter what position, no matter how high you are, supposedly, you can always you have choice. So make better choices. It's just good for everybody, not just you, but for everybody. Okay, Kevin, next one.
In this real side experience, I found myself in a very large building, a grand complexity of rooms and connecting corridors, and it soon became apparent this was a place of erudition, a school of teaching of a kind. The first consideration of the personal self would be that this may be a view of the extensive real side UNUversal UNUversities that are in operation on the real side now, overseen by the real guides and other entrusted and aware people who present as teachers, if you will, but perhaps better the term used would be sharers of real education and real references in these places, where only those with the real intent and sincerity for the real purpose, that of is recognition, can be found receiving these sharings. And of course, as with the vessels also in operation on the real side, these can be brought through to physical level actuality if the agreement is such that this can be allowed to take place, as creational actualizing of situations can only be so through cause and effect agreement. Also, however, are the dark forces replications of these UNUversal UNUversities on the real side, for they see what's happening on the real side. And even though these real UNUversities rather operate from a place beyond where they can perceive and access, locked into their personal selves as they are, for much like the ears, this UNUversal community has to be recognized, and if not, it rather operates beyond the bubbles of a personal self-immersed awareness. Despite such places being beyond then recognitional perceptual reach and therefore inaccessible, the dark forces can't infiltrate or attack the UNUversities. Their next best option is to create distorted versions of their own. They do this in an attempt to deceive people into thinking these are the genuine UNUversities, a deception that tends only work if an individual lacks real awareness standing in and recognition and the discernment such affords, or perhaps, for whatever reason, has moved their awareness into the personal self, where intent behind what is presented can't be so easily determined on the real side. And of course, agreements then to what are deceptive and fake UNUversities by the construction of the dark forces has the agreeing individual reptilian taplined. Although no deceptively forged tapline is irreversible, we can realize the deception and the next moment retract agreement. Many times I have found myself in both the real, genuine UNUversities and the fake dark force replicas. Sometimes is the case that I have had my awareness immersed in my personal self, for whatever reasons I have, and have found myself in the faked dark force replicas, as the deception is not realized through a personal self that has limited access to real awareness discernment of intent. But generally, despite this being so, even to the personal self, there are apparent signs and indicators that things are not in keeping with a UNUversity that should be operating from a place of purity and sincerity. But Dwayne has pointed out that when I find myself in the dark force buildings of deception, it's not necessarily that I am there through fault of my own, through my stepping outside of my real awareness and into a more easily deceived personal self, but that I am rather in a scouting capacity, I am investigating all the dark force creations, deceptions, and ideas in all their forms on the real side, then reporting my findings on the SKYPEs and such, that others are forewarned of all the various methods the dark forces attempt to seize attention with, to steal focus and glean agreements that they can tapline you through. For as I find myself in such places, even if I am initially in my personal self, the real awareness eventually shines through, as despite the back and forth we experience on our process, the overall real intent is maintained. And once in these dark force replicated UNUversities on the real side, once the real awareness is connected with, then I see all the indicators, receive all the impressions that confirm the UNUversity I am in to be a dark force creation, as everything will present as very distorted often, crude and unfinished, as the intent behind the surface is made apparent visually in this way through the real awareness that can see things for what they actually are and not what they are marketed to be on the surface. This seemed to be such a situation, though on this occasion I entered it with full understanding of what it was, a dark force fake. The building seemed to be as a university or school would, rooms full of people taking their lessons, with the teachers on hand, the teachers who would be dark force deceptors. Generally, the dark forces automatically know when their operations are infiltrated, or when a deceived individual suddenly realizes the deception, or when a deceived individual suddenly realizes the deception, and they then tend to attack and repel the intruders. If you're not totally deceived, not completely in agreement with the created illusion they wish you to be immersed in, they will attack you and attempt to eliminate you. Just like the earth here, as people are waking up, as they seek to break from their lifetimes of agreed to, indoctrinated, literal, illusionary idea creations of the dark forces. The dark forces would rather kill everyone and destroy the planet than have this be so. I rather knew that I would be detected, so I was executing a number of misdirection subterfuge-like tactics of my own. I would be constantly shifting my form and transforming into individuals that were working here in the university, and on a few occasions would see the actual individuals I was mimicking, and would rather have to exit the scene rapidly, as suddenly there being a duplicate of a teacher would rather give the game away. The vast majority of the school or university seemed to comprise of children, and a little like a previous real side experience I had, where the children in the dimensional containment place were being regimented, their schooling here was very much the same as the indoctrination children receive in the standardized physical level school systems. Very structured, very literal, very routined, very controlled, no possibility of self-expression, no stimulation of imagination or intuition, no hint or mention of anything to do with the real awareness or references to the true reality or the guides, and all the children looked so very bored, so very tired, almost drained of zest and vigour. And as Duane said, the dark forces will grab anyone and everyone they can and lock them into literal indoctrination to ensure, as best as they are able, that people don't become more aware, as the dark forces fear the loss of control and support of their agreed-to positions if awareness is allowed to become more so. I wouldn't have said these children here were necessarily those ready for their process of awareness, as with the 11 from the other real side experience I previously had, but just a case of the dark forces casting as wide a restricting net as possible to incorporate all they can on the physical and the real side. Nevertheless, children are more reachable, as being the age that they are, and even if already in schooling indoctrination centres, they haven't had the years and decades of literalism that slowly fossilizes individuals into their personal self-convictions of what life is according to the controllers. And so, I was rather going from classroom to classroom, causing from the controlling teacher's perspective disruption. Not always were teachers present, but on some occasions they were, and then in other initially teacher-absent classrooms, teachers would burst in and challenge me, etc. My disruption was more designed to break the children's focus and attention on the literal ideas they were being absorbed into. I would manipulate the room, make things fly around, make the boring books of literal tap-lining ideas the children were subjected to vanish. This enthralled the children, and overall did break them from almost zombie-like, glassy-eyed, awareness-absent states. It reminded me a little of that movie with Robin Williams, Dead Poets Society, where he, as a teacher, would enter a very standardized, indoctrinating school system, but instead of following literal teaching protocols, would instead seek to stimulate the imagination of the students, to have them break through routines and patterns of behavior, to be more spontaneous, to do things differently than they ever had before, the way children naturally are before indoctrination. At this point, it must have been apparent as to my intentions. but it was as though the teachers could do nothing to prevent me, as again, on previous real side experiences, it seemed I was operating from a position beyond their ability to effect imposition unto. All they could do was voice their discontent, but they had lost control of the children, who also, as they became more their real awareness selves, as they shook off their personal, literal self-immersion, so were their agreements lessened, or released, that the controlling teachers couldn't contain or impose upon their choices and experience either. The experience ended there, but it seems this is a decided course of a real side action also, to infiltrate these fake UNUversities on the real side, and get the attention, if possible, from individuals locked into an indoctrination and agreement to control that extends throughout creation, not just on the physical, and an expression of it are these real side dark force UNUversities. For every individual that becomes more aware, is agreement retracted from the created consciousness engine that is designed through agreement to the controllers to cause and effect destroy the planet, and as consciousness is, and therefore affects the simulator, ultimately, due to the restricting nature of the consciousness agreements, the eventual effect will implode the simulator, that is, the continued consciousness restriction expressed to its inevitable conclusion. Duane the great writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "Yes, the children are precious, and we're all stepping up to do whatever is required. That's why you were put there, and your experience opened up as it did. What we're doing is very important. Realistically, these dark force creations, these are in the other worlds or cyberspace, and the true real side is with us, but people have to figure that out, and they have to take the risk to see it. So in the meantime, we go around and bother people, etc. So you take the risk, you take things on, you take on the karma. When Paul was here and went to Europe, he purposely drank poison. He knew one of the drinks was poisoned, but he took it anyway, to take on the karma. And that's what we're doing here. This is where we're on assignment. We go through it. We're going to take on the karma, come back with pain, etc. But that's part of it, just like a soldier in a battle. And this is where, who has the courage to step up and really take part 100% and face everything, because this place is dying.
Tim, you think?
Yeah, it's interesting, Kevin's experiences and the Universal University and the imitations of it. like the vessels and all that. It sure seems that it can be made to happen in the real universes, but it sure seems like it's not happening in the physical, in the now.
Yeah, that's up to us here. Yeah, so the university idea, yeah, the education now is the very literal, dumbed down, indoctrination. And you mentioned a couple of things with the new university. The human potential to be real, you know, to be a real person, that's what education is about, real education, so that one can become a real person, not just like an indoctrinated robot following the system. They can be, like you said, spontaneous, develop intuition, insight, follow their impulses. Dwayne says, when you get an impulse, go with it, you know, act on it. To listen, you know, to your intuition. The kids could have imagination, seeing and being, develop their perception, real purpose, developing a real purpose so they can contribute to something real. And as Dwayne likes to talk about the seers, developing seers. He said that the other day, he said it's a difference between just the person who has experiences and a seer. Because I was talking about these people that dreamt a lot and had experiences, and he said, well, it's different than a seer, because I was calling them seers, but they were just having experiences. Seers really see what's going on behind the experience. They can interpret it in a way better to how it relates to something real. Seer. And that's where we had Claudia and Sandy. They were seers. They were doing something, they're contributing with their experiences that they had, not just having them, but they were actually doing something with them, like you, Kevin, reporting back, actually doing something, and you're giving a great overview of each experience that you have. You're really defining it really well. So that's a seer is more like that, rather than just a dreamer. Thank you for sharing today. Okay, well, let's sing the NUUU, and then we'll see each other Sunday. NUUU. Tim?
NUUU.
Kevin?
NUUU.